The stranger rode into Sweetwater Creek on a horse so gaunt it looked like death itself, and the woman watching from her porch knew immediately that he was either running from something or searching for it. Emma Thornton pressed her hand against the weathered wooden rail, squinting through the harsh Arizona sun of August 1878 as the man dismounted near the dried creek bed that gave the town its increasingly ironic name. The drought had lasted 3 months now, turning the once fertile valley into cracked earth and desperation. Water was scarcer than gold, and folks were starting to make hard choices about whether to stay or abandon their homesteads. The man was enormous, built like the mountains visible in the purple distance, with shoulders that strained against his buckskin shirt and arms thick as fence posts. His hair fell past his collar in dark waves, and even from 50 yards away, Emma could see the weariness in his posture. He looked up suddenly, catching her staring, and she felt something shift in her chest, like a key turning in a lock she had not known existed. Emma was 24 years old and had been alone on her late father's property for 6 months, ever since pneumonia had taken him in the winter. The land was 60 acres of stubborn soil that had once supported a modest cattle operation, but without water, the remaining steers were skin and bones, and she was down to 8 head from the original 30. Her nearest neighbor was 2 miles away, and the town of Sweetwater Creek was barely that, just a general store, a saloon, a church, and maybe 20 scattered homesteads clinging to the hope of rain. She should have gone inside, should have minded her own business, but instead, Emma found herself walking down the 3 porch steps and crossing the dusty yard toward where the stranger was letting his horse drink from her water trough. It was nearly empty, just a few inches of precious water she had hauled up from the town well that morning before dawn. "That water is not free," she called out, hearing the hardness in her own voice. She had learned to be hard. Softness got you taken advantage of out here. The man straightened slowly, and up close he was even more imposing. He had to be 6'4" at least, with a broad chest and hands that looked like they could break rocks. His face was weathered and tanned, with a strong jaw covered in dark stubble, and eyes the color of whiskey in sunlight. There was a scar along his left cheekbone, white against his tanned skin. "I apologize, ma'am," he said, his voice a low rumble. "My horse was desperate. I will pay you for it." Emma felt immediately ashamed of her harshness. The horse was clearly suffering, ribs showing, head hanging low. "No, it is fine. I'm sorry. This drought has made everyone mean." He studied her with those whiskey eyes, and she became suddenly aware of how she must look, her blonde hair falling out of its bun, her dress stained with dust and sweat, her hands calloused and rough. She was not a delicate woman. She stood 5'7" and had her father's sturdy build, strong from years of ranch work. "I'm looking for work," the man said, "and a place to stay for a while. I can work with cattle, horses, build fences, whatever needs doing." "There's not much work around here right now," Emma replied. "Not with the drought. I heard in Tucson that some ranches were hiring." "They might be, but those would be the big spreads 30 miles south. Here in Sweetwater Creek, we are all just trying to survive until the rains come." The man nodded slowly, disappointment crossing his features. He was younger than she had first thought, maybe 28 or 30, though the sun and hard living had carved lines around his eyes. "What is your name?" Emma asked, surprising herself. "Jacob Kane. Most people call me Kane." "I am Emma Thornton. This is my land." She gestured at the property behind her, the small ranch house, the barn that needed repairs, the empty corral. "Or it was my father's. Well, he died 6 months back." "I'm sorry for your loss." The words were simple but felt genuine, and Emma found herself wanting to keep him there, to not watch him ride away. It had been so lonely, the endless days of work and worry with no one to talk to, no one to help carry the burden. "I cannot pay much," she heard herself say, "but I have a spare room in the barn, and I can offer meals in exchange for work. The cattle need tending, and the whole place is falling apart without my father here to manage it." Kane's expression shifted, something like relief flooding his features. "That would be more than fair, Miss Thornton. I'm grateful for the opportunity." "It is Mrs. Thornton," she said automatically, then caught herself. "Or it was. I am a widow. My husband died 2 years ago. The cholera. I'm sorry. It seems we both know about loss." Emma managed a small smile. "Come on then. I will show you where you can settle your horse and get your things stored." As they walked toward the barn, Emma tried to ignore the awareness prickling along her skin. She had not been this close to a man, not really close, since Daniel had died. The few men in Sweetwater Creek were either married or old, and she had been too consumed with survival to think about anything else. But something about Kane's presence made her feel simultaneously nervous and safe, a contradiction she could not quite understand. The barn was dim and hot, smelling of old hay and dust. 2 cows stood in their stalls, looking miserable in the heat. Kane led his horse into an empty stall and began removing the saddle with practiced efficiency. His movements were smooth and capable, the motions of someone who had done this thousands of times. "There is a room at the back," Emma said, pointing to a door at the far end of the barn. "It is not much, but it has a cot and a window. My father used it during calving season when he needed to stay close to the animals." "It will be fine. I have slept in worse places." Emma wanted to ask where, wanted to know his story, but she held back. People came west for all kinds of reasons, and most preferred to leave their pasts behind them. She understood that. "I will bring you some water to wash up, and supper will be ready around sunset," she said. "We can discuss the work in the morning." Kane turned to face her, and in the dim light of the barn, his eyes seemed darker, more intense. "Thank you, Mrs. Thornton. You're taking a chance on a stranger, and I will not forget that kindness." Emma felt her cheeks warm and was grateful for the shadows. We all need help sometimes. Out here, you either help each other or you die. That is just how it is. She left quickly, her heart beating faster than it should. Back in the house, she leaned against the closed door and took a deep breath. What was she doing, inviting a strange man to live on her property? It was foolish, possibly dangerous, but something in her gut told her Kane was trustworthy. And Emma had learned to listen to her instincts. They had kept her alive this long. That evening, she made a simple supper of beans, cornbread, and the last of her salt pork. She set 2 places at the small kitchen table, feeling strange about it. And as she had eaten alone for so long that having company felt both foreign and welcome. When Kane knocked at the door just as the sun was painting the sky orange and purple, she found he had cleaned up, his face shaved, his hair still damp. "Come in," she said, stepping back to let him enter. He had to duck slightly to clear the doorframe, and suddenly her modest kitchen felt very small. Kane removed his hat and held it in his hands, looking uncertain. "You can sit," Emma said, gesturing to the table. "It is not fancy, but it is hot, and there is plenty." They sat across from each other, and for a few minutes the only sound was the scrape of spoons against bowls. Emma snuck glances at him, noticing the way his shoulders filled out his clean shirt, the strength in his hands as he broke apart the cornbread. "This is real good," Kane said finally. "Best meal I've had in weeks." "You must have been eating poorly then." He smiled, and the expression transformed his face, making him look younger and less careworn. "I have been on the trail for near on 2 months. You stop caring much about quality when you are hungry enough." "Where did you come from?" Kane was quiet for a moment, and Emma thought he might not answer. Then he said, "Colorado. I had a small operation up in the mountains, trapping mostly, some prospecting. But it got lonely up there, and I wanted to try something different. Thought I might find ranch work down south." "You picked a bad year for it. This drought has hurt everyone." "What will you do if the rains do not come soon?" Emma had been asking herself the same question for weeks. "I do not know. Sell the cattle for whatever I can get, I suppose. Maybe try to hold on to the land and wait it out. My father loved this place. It feels wrong to just abandon it. Sometimes the land asks more of us than we can give." There was something in his tone, a sadness that spoke of personal experience. Emma wanted to reach across the table, to touch his hand, to offer comfort, but she kept her hands in her lap. "The biggest problem is water," she said instead. "The creek dried up in June, and now everyone has to haul water from the town well or from Miller's Spring, which is near 8 miles away. The cattle are suffering, and I can barely keep them in the garden alive, let alone have enough for myself." "Is there no well on the property?" "My father tried to dig one about 5 years back. But he hit rock about 15 feet down and gave up, said it would take dynamite or a miracle to get through it, and we could not afford either." Kane looked thoughtful. "Where did he try?" "Out past the barn, near that stand of cottonwoods. You can still see the depression in the ground where he started." Cottonwoods mean water. They will not grow without it. That is what my father thought, but like I said, he hit rock. Rock can be broken. Emma felt a flicker of something that might have been hope, but did not dare name it. It would take weeks of work, and there is no guarantee there is water below the rock. It could be dry as dust down there. Or it could be your salvation. Kane met her eyes across the table. If you are willing, I could try. I have experience with hard digging. Spent time in mining camps before I went into the mountains. I could not ask you to do that. It would be brutal work in this heat. You're not asking. I am offering. His voice was firm but gentle. You gave me a place to stay and food to eat when you did not have to. Let me try to help you in return. Emma felt something crack open inside her chest, some wall she had built to protect herself from disappointment and loss. This man, this stranger, was offering to break his back on the slim chance of finding water, asking nothing in return but what she was already giving him. All right, she whispered. If you are willing to try, I would be grateful. The next morning, Emma woke before dawn to the sound of a pickaxe striking earth. She dressed quickly and went outside to find Kane already at work. His shirt off in the cool pre-dawn air, muscles bunching and flexing as he swung the pick into the old well site. He had already cleared away several feet of loose dirt and was working his way deeper. You started early, she called out. Kane paused and looked up, wiping sweat from his forehead. Even in the dim light, she could see the definition of his chest and arms, the power in his frame. Wanted to get as much done as possible before the heat of the day. Emma brought him water and a breakfast of biscuits and eggs, and he climbed out of the growing hole to eat. They sat on the ground together, watching the sun paint the sky pink and gold. I was thinking, Kane said between bites, that I could work on the well in the morning and evening when it's cooler, and during the heat of the day, I could handle other tasks. That fence by the north pasture looks like it is about to fall down. You do not have to do all that. I want to earn my keep. They fell into a routine over the following days. Kane would rise before dawn and work on the well, digging steadily deeper. Emma would bring him breakfast and they would eat together as the sun came up, talking about small things at first, the weather, the cattle, the state of the barn roof. Then, gradually, as trust built between them, their conversations deepened. Kane told her about growing up in Missouri, the youngest of 5 boys, how he had headed west at 18, looking for adventure and fortune. He had found plenty of the former and little of the latter, drifting from job to job, place to place, never quite finding where he belonged. Emma shared her own story. How she had come to Arizona with her parents as a child, how she had married Daniel when she was 19, how they had been happy despite the hardship. She talked about her father's stubbornness and kindness, how much she missed him, how scared she was of losing the land he had worked so hard to build. By the end of the first week, Kane had dug down past the rock layer her father had given up on, using a combination of picks, bars, and sheer determination to break through. He worked like a man possessed, and Emma worried about him, seeing the toll it took on his body. His hands were raw and blistered, his back and shoulders covered in bruises from the hard labor. You need to rest, she told him one evening as she applied salve to his blistered palms. They were sitting on her porch, the sky turning purple with dusk, and she was very aware of the intimacy of touching him, of holding his large, calloused hands in her smaller ones. I am fine, Kane said, but his voice was tired. You are not fine. You are working yourself to death. I have to find water for you, Emma. It was the first time he had used her given name, and the sound of it on his lips made her breath catch. She looked up and found him watching her with an intensity that made her pulse race. Why? She asked softly. Why does it matter so much? Kane was quiet for a long moment. Because you matter, he finally said. Because you took a chance on me when you did not have to. Because you are brave and strong, and you deserve to keep your father's land. Because he trailed off, looking away. Because you what? Because I have been drifting for 10 years, Emma. Looking for something without knowing what it was. And then I rode into this dried-up town and saw you standing on that porch, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I might have found it. Emma's heart was hammering so hard she was sure he could hear it. Kane, I am not asking for anything, he said quickly. I know I am just a drifter you hired for work, but I need you to understand why I am doing this. It is not just about the well. It is about giving you what you need, about being the kind of man who can provide and protect and build something lasting. She should have been scared by the intensity of his words, by how fast this was happening. They had known each other barely more than a week. But Emma had learned that life was short and uncertain, that you could lose everything in a moment, and that sometimes you had to grab onto hope with both hands when it presented itself. "You are not just a drifter," she said, still holding his hands. "You are a good man, Kane. I see that. I have seen it from the first day." "Emma, I need to tell you something else." His expression turned serious. "I killed a man in Colorado. It was self-defense, a claim jumper who came at me with a knife. But I did not wait around to explain it to the law. That is why I left, why I've been moving. I am not running anymore. But you should know what you are getting involved with." Emma should have pulled away, should have been frightened, but all she felt was sadness for the burden he had been carrying. "Did you have a choice?" "It was him or me." "Then you did what you had to do to survive. That does not make you a bad person, Kane. It makes you human." She saw the relief in his eyes, the weight lifting from his shoulders. Slowly, carefully, he lifted one of his battered hands and cupped her cheek. His palm was rough and warm, and Emma leaned into the touch, her eyes fluttering closed. "I am falling in love with you," Kane whispered. "I know it is too soon, and I know I have no right, but I cannot help it." Emma opened her eyes and looked at him, this strong, gentle man who was digging her a well with his bare hands, who was breaking himself apart to give her what she needed. "It is not too soon," she said, "and you have every right, because I am falling in love with you too." Kane leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away, but Emma did not move. When his lips met hers, it was gentle at first, tentative, and then deeper as she responded, her hands coming up to grip his shoulders. He tasted like dust and coffee and something essentially male, and Emma felt like she was waking up after a long sleep. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Kane rested his forehead against hers. "I am going to find you water, Emma. I swear it. And then, if you will have me, I'm going to stay here and help you build this ranch into something your father would be proud of. I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you have everything you need." "I already have what I need," Emma whispered. "You are here. That's enough." But Kane was determined, and over the next 2 weeks he dug deeper into the earth, disappearing into a hole that was now over 30 feet deep. Emma would lower buckets on ropes for him to fill with dirt and rock, she hauling them up with a system of pulleys Kane had rigged. It was backbreaking work for both of them, but they pushed forward together, driven by desperation and hope and the growing love between them. They stole kisses in the evening, sitting on the porch after supper, and Emma marveled at how different it felt from her marriage to Daniel. She had loved Daniel, but it had been a comfortable, familiar love, built on shared history and companionship. What she felt for Kane was like wildfire, intense and consuming, a passion she had not known herself capable of feeling. On the morning of the 15th day, Emma was hauling up a bucket of dirt when she heard Kane shout from below. Her heart seized with fear, thinking he was hurt, and she ran to the edge of the well. "Kane, are you all right?" His face appeared below, looking up at her, and he was grinning, his teeth white in his dirt-covered face. "It is damp, Emma. The soil is damp." She felt tears spring to her eyes. "Are you certain?" "As certain as I have ever been of anything. We are close, Emma. We are so close." He dug for the rest of that day with renewed energy, and Emma stayed by the well, hauling bucket after bucket of increasingly wet soil. As the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of fire, Kane let out a whoop of triumph. "Water! Emma, there is water!" She could hardly believe it, but when she lowered the bucket down and Kane sent it back up, it was full of clear, cold water. Emma started to cry, great heaving sobs of relief and joy, and Kane climbed up the ladder they had rigged, emerging from the well like some earth-covered miracle. He was soaked, covered in mud, grinning like a fool. And Emma did not care. She threw herself into his arms, and he lifted her off the ground, spinning her around as they both laughed and cried. "You did it," she said between sobs. "Kane, you actually did it." "We did it," he corrected, setting her down but not letting her go. "We did it together." That night they did not bother with separate sleeping arrangements. Emma led Kane into her house, into her bedroom, and they came together with a passion born of relief and love and the pure joy of being alive. Kane was gentle despite his strength, treating her like something precious, and Emma gave herself to him completely, holding nothing back. Afterwards, they lay tangled together in her bed, the window open to let in the cool night air, and Emma traced the scars on Kane's chest with her fingertips. "Marry me," Kane said suddenly. "I know we have not known each other long, but out here, time moves different. I love you, Emma. I want to build a life with you, have children with you, grow old on this land with you." Emma felt her heart swell so large she thought it might burst from her chest. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you." They were wed a week later by the circuit preacher who came through Sweetwater Creek, with half the town in attendance. Folks were curious about the stranger who had dug Emma Thornton a well with his bare hands, and the story had spread through the community like wildfire. The well itself had become something of a local miracle, and several neighbors had already asked Kane if he would help them dig wells on their properties. "We could start a business," Emma suggested one evening as they lay in bed. No, Kane's arm around her shoulders. "Kane's well digging. You could hire a crew, and we could help the whole community. That would take capital we do not have. We could start small, do a few wells, save the money, build from there. With water, this valley could thrive again." Kane kissed the top of her head. "You have a good business mind, Mrs. Kane." Emma smiled at her new name. "I have a good partner." They fell into a rhythm over the following months. Kane did indeed start taking on well-digging jobs, and he was good at it, finding water where others said it was impossible. Word spread, and soon he had more work than he could handle alone. He hired 2 men from town, and Emma managed the business side, keeping the books and negotiating contracts. The well on their own property produced plenty of water for the cattle in the garden, and with the livestock healthy again, they were able to sell some steers at a decent price. Money was still tight, but they were no longer on the edge of disaster. Emma discovered she was pregnant in the spring of 1879, and Kane's joy was so pure and overwhelming that it made her cry. He became even more protective, insisting she take it easy, hiring a woman from town to come help with the heavy housework. "I am pregnant, not dying," Emma protested, but she was secretly touched by his concern. "You are carrying our child," Kane said, his hand resting gently on her still flat belly. "There is nothing more precious in the world." Their son was born in November, a big, healthy boy they named Thomas after Emma's father. Kane wept when he held his son for the first time, this huge mountain of a man reduced to tears by the tiny bundle in his arms. "He is perfect," Kane whispered. "You are perfect. I do not deserve this much happiness." "Yes, you do," Emma said firmly. "You deserve every bit of it." The well-digging business continued to grow, and by 1880 Kane had a crew of 6 men working for him. He had dug wells for nearly every homestead in the valley, and communities in neighboring areas were sending for him. They were not wealthy, but they were comfortable, and more importantly, they were happy. Emma gave birth to twin girls in 1881, Clara and Rose, and their house was suddenly full of noise and chaos and love. Kane was a devoted father, patient and playful, and Emma often found him in the evenings with a baby on each arm and Thomas at his feet, and telling them stories about the mountains and the animals he had seen in his travels. In 1883, when Thomas was 4 and the twins were 2, a group of investors from Tucson approached Kane about expanding his operation into a full-scale water management company. They wanted to build irrigation systems and reservoirs throughout southern Arizona, and they needed someone with Kane's expertise to oversee the work. "It would mean a lot of travel," Kane said to Emma as they discussed the offer. "I would be gone weeks at a time." "Then we will go with you," Emma said simply. "The children and I. We are a family, Kane. We stay together." So they did, spending the next several years traveling throughout the territory, Kane overseeing water projects while Emma managed the finances and kept their family together. The children grew up on the road, but learning about different places and people, receiving their education from their mother and from experience. But they always came back to the ranch in Sweetwater Creek, to the land Thomas Thornton had loved, and that Kane had saved with a well dug by his own hands. They expanded the house, adding rooms for the growing children, and Kane built Emma a proper garden with an irrigation system that kept it lush even in the driest months. In 1885, Emma gave birth to their last child, another son they named Jacob after his father. By then, Kane's company was one of the most respected water management operations in the Southwest, and they had built a comfortable life for their family. One evening in the summer of 1886, Emma and Kane sat on their porch watching their children play in the yard. Thomas was 7 now, tall and strong like his father, helping the twins climb the cottonwood tree near the original well. Baby Jacob was asleep in Emma's arms. "Do you ever miss it?" Emma asked. "The mountains, the solitude, the life you had before?" Kane turned to look at her, and his eyes were soft with love. "Not for a single second. I was not living before I found you, Emma. I was just existing. You gave me purpose, a family, a home. You gave me everything that quenched the thirst in my soul." "You dug me a well," Emma said, smiling, "with your bare hands. You gave me water when I was dying of thirst." "And you gave me life," Kane replied, leaning over to kiss her gently. "A real life worth living. That is worth more than any well." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set over their land, the land they had saved together, the land their children would inherit. The drought that had brought them together was long past, but neither of them would ever forget those desperate days when a stranger had ridden into town and changed everything. In 1890, Kane officially retired from active fieldwork, though he remained a consultant and advisor to the company he had built. He was 42 years old and wanted to spend more time with his family, watching his children grow, helping Emma run the ranch that had expanded significantly over the years. Thomas, at 11, was already showing an interest in his father's work, asking endless questions about water tables and soil composition and well construction. The twins, at 9, were wild and fearless, more interested in horses and cattle than anything domestic. And little Jacob, at 5, was his mother's son, always reading, always curious about the business side of things. Emma, at 36, was as beautiful as ever to Kane, maybe more so. She had grown into her strength, becoming a respected businesswoman and rancher in her own right. People came to her for advice on land management and financial planning, and she served on the board of the new school being built in Sweetwater Creek, which had grown from a tiny settlement into a proper town. One spring morning in 1891, Kane woke early and walked out to the original well, the one that had started everything. It was still producing clean, clear water, a testament to the aquifer he had found all those years ago. He lowered the bucket and brought up water, drinking deeply from the tin cup they kept hanging on the side. "You are up early," Emma said, she coming up behind him and wrapping her arms around his waist. "I was thinking about that first day," Kane said, "when I rode in here, half dead, desperate for work and water." "I was watching you from the porch," Emma admitted. "I was so alone, Kane, so scared. And then you appeared like an answer to a prayer I had not known to say. I think we saved each other that day. I know we did." They stood together in the growing light, looking out over their land, their home, their life. The ranch was prosperous now, with healthy cattle, productive fields, and a half-dozen employees who helped manage it all. The well-digging company was thriving under the management of Kane's former foreman. Their children were healthy and happy and full of promise. "Do you think we did it right?" Kane asked. "Is building this life?" "I think we did it together," Emma replied. "And that is what matters. Everything we have we built side by side. The good and the bad, we faced it together." Thomas came running from the house, his long legs eating up the distance. "Father, Mother, Mr. Henderson is here about buying those steers." "Tell him we will be there in a minute," Kane called back. But before they went to handle business, he turned Emma in his arms and kissed her deeply, the way he had that first night when she had agreed to marry him. She kissed him back with equal passion, and when they broke apart, both were smiling. "I love you," Kane said. "I will never stop loving you." "I know," Emma replied, "and I will never stop being grateful that you rode into my life that day. You gave me water, Kane. You gave me life. But more than that, you gave me love. Real, lasting love. The kind that weathers droughts and hard times and all the challenges life throws at us." "You gave me the same," Kane said. "You took a broken, drifting man and gave him a home. You saw something in me worth saving. I saw a good man who needed someone to believe in him, and I saw a strong woman who needed someone to stand beside her, not in front of her or behind her, but beside her as an equal partner. They walked back to the house hand in hand, ready to face another day of work and family and the thousand small joys and challenges that made up a life. Behind them, the well continued to flow, the water that Kane had found with his hands, and his determination and his refusal to give up. The years continued to roll forward, as years do. Thomas grew into a fine young man, studying engineering and planning to expand his father's water management work with new technologies. The twins, Clara and Rose, both married local ranchers in a double wedding in 1897 that had half the territory in attendance. Jacob, the youngest, surprised everyone by deciding to study law, wanting to help ensure water rights were fairly distributed among the growing population. In 1900, Kane and Emma celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary. Kane was 52 now, his dark hair liberally streaked with silver, his body still strong but carrying the aches and pains of years of hard labor. Emma was 46, laugh lines around her eyes, her hands still capable and strong. They threw a party at the ranch, inviting everyone who had been part of their journey. Folks came from all over the territory to celebrate, sharing stories and laughter and joy. When Kane stood to make a toast, the room fell silent. 20 years ago, he said, his voice still that same low rumble that made Emma's heart flutter, I was a drifter with nothing to my name but a tired horse and a troubled past. I rode into Sweetwater Creek looking for work, and I found so much more. I found purpose, I found home, I found love. He turned to look at Emma, and his eyes were bright with emotion. Emma, you gave me everything a man could ask for. You believed in me when I did not believe in myself. You stood beside me through every challenge. You gave me children, a home, a life worth living. You quenched every thirst I ever had, and I am grateful every single day that you took a chance on a stranger. Emma stood and went to him, taking his hand. And you gave me water in the desert, she said, her voice carrying through the room, literally and figuratively. When I was at my lowest, when I thought I would lose everything, you appeared and saved me. But more than that, you loved me. You saw me as a partner, not as a fragile thing to be protected. You trusted me with your dreams and fears. You built a life with me, not for me. That is the greatest gift anyone has ever given me. They kissed to cheers and applause, and the party continued late into the night, full of music and dancing and celebration. In the quiet hours before dawn, when all the guests had finally gone home or fallen asleep in spare rooms and bedrolls scattered around the property, Emma and Kane walked out to the well one more time. The stars were brilliant overhead, and the air was cool and sweet. Do you remember how desperate we were? Emma asked, looking down into the dark shaft of the well. How it felt like everything was dying, and we were dying with it? I remember, Kane said. I remember thinking that if I could just find water for you, everything would be all right. I did not know then that you were the water I had been searching for all along. We saved each other, Emma said. That is what love does. It sees the need in another person and says, let me help carry that burden. Let me dig that well. Let me stand beside you in the hard times. They stood in silence for a moment, and then Kane began to laugh, a deep, joyful sound. What would we tell that man and woman from 20 years ago if we could? The ones standing in your dusty yard, strangers to each other, undesperate and alone? I would tell them to hold on, Emma said. I would tell them that the struggle is worth it, that the work is worth it, that taking the risk is worth it, because on the other side of that desperate moment is a lifetime of love and joy and partnership. I would tell them to dig deeper, Kane added. Even when you hit rock, even when it seems impossible, keep digging. Because the water is there, you just have to believe enough to keep going. As the sun began to rise, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, they walked back to the house together, their arms around each other's waists. The ranch was quiet except for the lowing of cattle and the chirp of morning birds. Everything they had built together was spread out before them, a testament to hard work and love, and the decision two people had made to trust each other when they had every reason not to. In 1905, Kane was diagnosed with arthritis, the years of hard labor finally catching up with him. His hands, which had dug through rock and earth to find water, were now stiff and painful on cold mornings. Emma treated them with salves and warm compresses, and Kane joked that he was just getting broken in properly. "You are not broken," Emma would say firmly. "You are seasoned, like good leather or fine whiskey." They traveled less now, content to stay at the ranch and watch their grandchildren play in the yard. Clara had given them 2 grandsons, Rose had a daughter and another child on the way, and Thomas, who had married a schoolteacher from Tucson, had just welcomed a baby girl. Jacob was still unmarried. He focused on his law practice, but he visited often, bringing news from Phoenix where he worked. Emma herself was slowing down, her knees aching more than they used to, her energy not what it once was. But she still managed the ranch accounts and helped Kane with his consulting work. And on warm evenings, they still sat on the porch together, holding hands and watching the sunset over the land they loved. In 1908, a massive drought hit the region again, reminiscent of the one that had brought them together 30 years earlier. But this time, the valley was prepared. The wells Kane had dug, the irrigation systems he had designed, the water management practices he had taught, all of it meant that while the drought was difficult, it was not the disaster it would have been without his work. "Yeah, you did that," Emma told him one evening as they looked out over their still green pastures while the surrounding uncultivated land turned brown. "You saved this whole valley, Kane. Not just me, not just our family, but everyone here." "We did it," Kane corrected, as he always did. "You managed the business, you kept us afloat financially, you raised our children and taught them the value of hard work and compassion. None of this would exist without you." In 1910, they celebrated their 30th anniversary with a quiet dinner, just the 2 of them. Kane was 62 now, Emma 56, and they had lived a full, rich life together. Their children were all grown and successful, their grandchildren were healthy and bright, and the ranch continued to prosper. "If you could go back," Kane asked as they ate dessert on the porch, "would you change anything?" Emma considered the question seriously. They had faced hardships over the years, illnesses and financial troubles, and the normal struggles of any long marriage. They had argued and disagreed and hurt each other, as any 2 people in close quarters for 30 years inevitably do. But through it all, they had chosen each other, over and over again. "No," she said finally, "I would not change a thing, because every challenge we faced made us stronger. Every argument taught us how to communicate better. Every hardship reminded us what we were fighting for. I would not trade a single moment, good or bad, because all of it led us here." "I feel the same," Kane said, reaching for her hand. "You know what the best part is?" "What?" "I love you more now than I did 30 years ago. I did not think that was possible, but it is true. Every year with you, every day, every moment, just makes me love you more." Emma felt tears prick her eyes. "I love you too, Kane. You are the best man I have ever known. You dug me a well, and you have been quenching my thirst for love and companionship and partnership ever since. And you gave me everything in return," Kane said. "Purpose, family, home, love, everything that matters, everything that makes life worth living." They sat on the porch until the stars came out, talking about their years together, remembering the good times and the hard times, grateful for all of it. The well that Kane had dug all those years ago still provided water for the ranch, still stood as a symbol of what determination and love could accomplish. In 1915, Kane fell ill with pneumonia. Emma nursed him through it, sitting by his bedside day and night, sponging his fevered brow and coaxing him to drink water and broth. Their children came to visit, their faces worried, and Emma put on a brave face for them while her heart shattered with fear. Kane pulled through, weakened but alive, and the first thing he said when his fever broke was, "I am not ready to leave you yet." "Good," Emma said, trying not to cry, "because I am not ready to let you go." He recovered slowly, and by spring he was back on his feet, though he tired more easily now. They celebrated his 67th birthday with the whole family gathered at the ranch, and Kane looked around at the faces of his children and grandchildren and told Emma it was the best birthday he had ever had. "I used to think I wanted adventure," he said. I thought I needed to keep moving, to keep searching for something. But this, right here, this family we built, this life we created, this is the real adventure. And you, Emma, you are the treasure at the end of the journey. In 1918, the world was consumed by war and influenza, and even their remote corner of Arizona was not untouched. Jacob, their youngest, enlisted despite being 33 years old, feeling it was his duty to serve. Emma was terrified, memories of losing Daniel to disease flooding back, but Kane held her and reminded her that their son was strong and smart and would come home to them. Jacob did come home, safe and sound, and his return in 1919 was cause for another family celebration. He brought with him a French bride, a nurse he had met in Paris, and Emma welcomed her daughter-in-law with open arms. The 1920s brought prosperity and growth to the region, and the Kane family expanded with more grandchildren and even a few great-grandchildren. Kane and Emma settled into comfortable old age, their days quieter, but no less full of love and purpose. They could no longer do the physical work the ranch required, but they oversaw operations and offered guidance, and they spent long hours on the porch, holding hands and watching the world go by. In the summer of 1925, as they prepared to celebrate their 45th wedding anniversary, Kane began to slow down significantly. He slept more, ate less, and Emma could see death hovering at the edges of their life together. She was not ready, would never be ready, but she also knew that they had been blessed with more years together than many couples got. One warm evening in August, as the sun was setting and the sky was painted in brilliant oranges and purples, Kane called Emma to sit with him on the porch. "I need to tell you something," he said, his voice weaker than it used to be, but still that same rumble she had fallen in love with. "What is it?" Emma asked, fear clutching at her heart. "I'm tired, Emma. My body is wearing out. I can feel it." "No," Emma whispered. "No, Kane. You will be fine. You're just having a hard day." "Emma, listen to me." He took both her hands in his, and she could feel how frail he had become, the strength that had once defined him fading. "I'm not afraid of dying. I have lived a full life, a good life, a life beyond anything I ever dreamed possible. But I'm afraid of leaving you. I'm afraid you will be alone." "I will not be alone," Emma said, with tears streaming down her face. "I have our children, our grandchildren. I have the life we built together." "Promise me something," Kane said. "Promise me you will keep living, really living, after I am gone. Do not just exist. Find joy in every day. Remember the love we shared, and let it make you happy, not sad." "I cannot promise that," Emma sobbed. "How can I be happy without you?" "Because you are strong, Emma. You were strong before I met you, and you will be strong after I am gone. You survived loss before, and you will survive this too. And when your time comes, I will be waiting for you. I will be waiting at the well, ready to give you all the water you need for eternity." Emma leaned her head against his shoulder, and they sat that way until the stars came out, neither speaking, just being together. The Kane lingered for another few weeks, and the family gathered, knowing the end was near. He spent time with each of his children and grandchildren, giving advice and sharing stories, and making sure they knew how loved they were. But most of his time was spent with Emma, their hands intertwined, their hearts beating in tandem after 45 years together. He passed quietly one morning in September, with Emma beside him, his last word her name. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people whose lives Kane had touched through his work and his kindness. They told stories of the wells he had dug, the water he had found, the communities he had saved. But Emma knew the real story, the one that mattered most, was the story of a man who had dug a well for a desperate woman, and in doing so, had found his own salvation. Emma grieved deeply, as anyone would after losing the love of their life, but she kept her promise to Kane. She kept living, kept finding joy in her children and grandchildren, in the ranch they had built together, in the memories of their years together. She remained active in the community, serving on boards and helping with church functions and offering advice to young couples starting out. She lived until 1940, passing peacefully at the age of 86. Her children buried her next to Kane on a hill overlooking the ranch, with a headstone that read, "She gave him everything that quenched him, and he dug her a well in the desert. Together, They found water in the wilderness and love that will never run dry. The ranch stayed in the family for generations, and the original well that Kane dug with his hands became something of a historical landmark. People would visit it, draw water from it, and tell their children the story of the mountain man who came to Sweetwater Creek in a time of drought and found more than water in that desperate land. He found love, purpose, home, and a legacy that would outlast him by a century. And on warm summer evenings, when the light is just right and the breeze carries the scent of sage and dust, locals swear you can see two figures on the porch of the old Kane ranch house, sitting close together, holding hands, watching the sunset over the land they loved and the life they built together. A testament to the truth that real love, the kind that is built on sacrifice and partnership and choosing each other every single day, never truly dies. It just transforms into something eternal, like water in the desert, which is essential and life-giving and precious beyond measure. The Kane family continued to prosper, with each generation learning the story of their ancestors and understanding that their success was built on the foundation of two people who had refused to give up when times were hard, who had seen need in each other and responded with generosity and love. They taught their children that real strength comes from vulnerability, that real wealth comes from relationships, and that the most important things you can dig for in this life are not gold or silver, but water and love and the connections that sustain us through drought and plenty alike. And through it all, the well continued to flow, producing clean, clear water for more than 100 years after Kane first struck that aquifer with his bleeding hands and indomitable will. The engineers marveled at its consistency, at the depth and purity of the water source he had found. But those who knew the real story understood that the well was more than a feat of engineering or determination. It was a symbol of what happens when one person sees another in need and decides to act, when love moves mountains, or, in this case, digs through solid rock to find life in the most unlikely places. The story of Kane and Emma became legend in southern Arizona, told and retold around campfires and dinner tables, adapted and embellished but never losing its essential truth. It was a story about survival and perseverance, about the harsh realities of frontier life and the choices people make when pushed to their limits. But more than that, it was a love story, pure and simple. The story of two people who found each other when they most needed it, who built something lasting from dust and determination, and who proved that sometimes the greatest treasures are not found in the ground, but in the hearts of those brave enough to dig deep and risk everything for love. Their great-grandchildren still gather at the ranch every summer for a reunion, dozens of descendants of that union between a drifting mountain man and a desperate widow. They draw water from Kane's well and toast to the memory of the two people who started it all. They walk the land that Emma and Kane saved, cultivated, and loved. They tell their own children the story, making sure it never dies, because some stories are too important, too powerful, too true to be forgotten. And in that way, Kane and Emma live on, not just in the blood of their descendants or in the historical records of water management in the Southwest, but in the very air and soil and water of that place. They are part of the land now, as essential and eternal as the aquifer Kane found all those years ago, as constant as the love they shared, as necessary as water in the desert. Their story is a reminder that sometimes the greatest adventures are not about traveling to distant lands or seeking fame and fortune, but about finding someone who sees you clearly and loves you anyway, about building a life together one day at a time, and about leaving the world better than you found it through love, work, and the simple act of digging a well for someone who thirsts.